Darwin's theory of evolution came from his observations in the natural world. He noticed that he found similar species of organisms in similar habitats. So, for example, he noted that while the animals found in South America were very different from those found in Europe, he noted that those living in the similar geographic locations had similar characteristics. So although there weren't rabbits in South America, there were Patagonia cavi, which resembled the European hare. Both ate grasses, hidden bushes, moved rapidly using their long hind legs, but the Patagonian cavi has a face kind of like a guinea pig. So perhaps the cavi resembles a rabbit because they inhabit similar habitats, and it resembles a guinea pig because it once had a common ancestor with the guinea pig. So he hypothesized that related species were potentially going to be modified by their environment. Next, Darwin traveled to the Galapagos Islands. This is a group of small volcanic islands off the coast of South America. These islands are too far apart from the mainland for terrestrial plants and animals to migrate there. And so the species that he found on the island were going to be slightly different from those found on the mainland. And there were going to be slight variations from one island to the next. So, for example, each island had their own version of the tortoise. Darwin proposed that the differences correlated to the variance in vegetations on the islands. The long-necked tortoises were only found on islands that were drier and had less growing vegetation. The short-necked tortoises were found on islands with lots of vegetation close to the ground. So he hypothesized that on islands where there's very little low vegetation, tortoises who had longer necks, sort of like a giraffe, would do well, would survive and thrive. And also, just take a moment to look at this tortoise and appreciate him. My goodness, he looks like a dinosaur, some sort of ancient creature. I don't think I've ever encountered a tortoise with a long neck like that in real life. So anyway, I love this photo of that particular tortoise. So he proposed that the speciation on the islands correlated to the difference in the vegetation. He also studied finches. With the finches, he observed that many different species of finches were going to be found across the various islands, and they had a significant variety in their beak structure. He speculated that they could have been descended from the common mainland finch species, but that they had evolved or adapted to their environment over the course of time. So from all of his notes and observations from his trip to the Galapagos, Darwin was able to develop his theory of natural selection as a means of evolutionary change. So he proposed that natural selection is a process based on the following observations. Number one, organisms or members of a population have inheritable variations. 2, more individuals are going to be produced each generation than the environment can support, and so those organisms are going to have to compete for available resources. Because they're competing for available resources, some individuals have adaptive characteristics, meaning that they have favorable traits that result in an increased survival and reproduction, which causes organisms within the population to differ in their reproductive success. In other words, variation is inheritable. It gets passed down from one generation to the next, and some variations are better in that particular environment than others. Those that are favorable are going to get passed down. Those that are not favorable will not. Simple as that. So Darwin emphasized that individuals from a population must vary in their functional characteristics, their physical characteristics, and their behavioral characteristics. And he proposed that these variations occur randomly. There's no pre-selecting for long necks. There's no pre-selecting for a sharper beak. It's just those mutations occur randomly. Some can be harmful, some are helpful, some are neutral. And this is going to be essential to the natural selection process. Those that are harmful get weeded out of the population. Those that are beneficial get more strongly represented in the population. This ultimately is what allows for adaptation to the environment over time. So the species will become more and more suited to its particular environment based on these variations. He also proposed the idea of fitness. Fitness is the relative reproductive success of an individual. The most fit individuals within a population are going to capture a disproportionate share of the goodies. Interactions with the environment determine which individuals are going to reproduce the most. For example, among the western diamondback rattlesnakes living in a dark environment, the most fit are going to be black. But living in a lighter environment, the most fit are going to be light. So background matching helps an animal avoid being captured. So what we're going to find with these diamondback snakes is that in darker environments, we're going to see darker snakes. In lighter environments, those that are living out maybe on the plains or on the grasses, we're going to see lighter patterns and lighter variations in the snakes. Anything that's going to be sort of medium colored is not going to do well in either environment. So we're going to see sort of a split or a divergence in favorable characteristics. So organisms become adapted. Adaptation just means that it means a change that helps the species become more suited to its particular environment. This is just a product of natural selection. Now, Darwin noted that humans can artificially modify desired traits in plants and animals by selectively breeding certain individuals. So, for example, the diversity of domestic dogs has resulted from prehistoric humans selectively breeding wolves with particular traits, such as hair length or height or guarding behaviors. That artificial selection can help produce whatever sort of traits that we personally find desirable, can help see an emergence of those in the population. So Darwin's theory of evolution. Darwin took all of this information, all of this background, and he ultimately knew that we could breed for specific traits and characteristics in various species, so he applied those same principles to the natural world. The idea was that natural selection could produce diversity with the environment being the force that selects for specific traits. Like I said, he was looking at his finches. Each of the 13 species of Galapagos finches had beaks that were adapted to a particular way of life. So some had heavy beaks that were suited to a diet of large seeds. The beak of the warbler finch is going to be more suited for feeding on insects. A long, somewhat curved beak and the split tongue of the cactus finch is going to be suited for probing the cactus for seeds. And there were other observations for natural selections. He noticed the changes in shells of marine snails due to hunting by crabs. He noticed changes in the beak length of the scarlet honeycreeper due to a new food source. We've even seen this. The industrial melanism. So this is a very common example of how natural selection can shape a trait in a population. Prior to the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain, the light-colored peppered moths were more common than the dark-colored peppered moths. But with the increase of pollution during the Industrial Revolution, the dark-colored moths rose in population. They were able to better hide among the soot on the buildings. And so the dark moths kind of took over the population. They took over 80% of the peppered moth population. With a change in legislation to reduce carbon emissions in the last 70 years, the lighter colored pepper moths now dominate again. They're better now that the air is clean and the buildings are clean, trees are cleaner, bark is cleaner. The lighter colored pepper moths are able to hide much better, and so the population has swung back in the direction of the lighter colored pepper moths. Bacterial resistance or bacterial resistance to antibiotics. That's a huge area of natural selection that we're sort of dealing with now, or outcome of natural selection that we are dealing with now. Bacteria that randomly develop a resistance to antibiotics can survive and thrive in the presence of that antibiotic. So they're going to take over. They are going to become super popular or populous because they can outcompete all of the other bacteria that are susceptible to antibiotics. So this is just sort of other areas of evidence or other areas in which we can see natural selection at play.